That's the voice that tells us we can start. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first part of the end of the day. But that's the nicest way of saying it. But welcome to these really important sessions, the two plenaries that we have to do, and welcome to the first of these. We have Mobilizing Climate Finance through Legal and Policy Solutions, which is high-level plenary 2, which is focused on what key milestones have MDBs and IFIs accomplished in the journey towards fulfilling climate finance goals, sustainable development goals, and Paris Agreement alignment commitments. What is the impact of these efforts on the ground in their countries of operation? We are very lucky to have such an accomplished panel with us, joining us both in person and online. And to lead us through this high-level plenary, we have our expert moderator, Advocate Vesselina Haralampieva from the EBRD. Over to you, Vesselina.
Thank you very much, Tejas, and good afternoon, everyone, and hello, everyone who is watching us virtually. It's a real pleasure to be here and to moderate this fantastic panel of esteemed general counsels from the leading multilateral development banks. We have heard a lot today about the need to scale up climate finance, about the role of public finance in particular, to mobilize private sector finance, to create enabling regulatory frameworks, to encourage and unlock green financing opportunities and work with the small and medium-sized businesses. In order to face the climate crisis, the global financial institutions and MDBs in particular are called to turn billions into trillions in less than a decade. And as you can imagine, this is not an easy task. So each institution has particular challenges in doing that, really associated with the regions they operate, with deficient, less ambitious policy actions, regulatory frameworks, administrative barriers, insufficient private sector capital flowing into these emerging markets and developing economies. A number of other challenges, which underlines the very important role these institutions have to play. What we want to talk today about is, in addition to all the great things that MDBs are doing, what is the role also of the legal department in supporting and steering the operations of these institutions? How do they support private investments and provide support to these regions and to the communities that are the most vulnerable to climate-related risks, the most also at the forefront of the climate crisis? So we will hear more today from our panelists, how they are and their teams are addressing the greatest challenge of our time. So let me start by introducing General Counsel of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Mr. Michael Strauss, who is sitting on my right. Michael is a general counsel at the bank where I work since January 2020. In that role, Mike serves on the executive committee, the crisis management team, and other committees of the bank. Mr. Strauss joined EBRD from private practice, and before that, he has a quite extensive experience in public sector. He represented the United States on the board of the Asian Development Bank and served as a senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary for International Finance at the US Treasury. Mike has worked as a legal counsel in both the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund, primarily focused on sovereign debt, institutional governance, political risk mitigation, and development in Francophone Africa. Next to Mike is seated the General Counsel of the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Thomas Clark, who has over 30 years of experience in legal and government affairs practices, spanning across the financial services, energy, and infrastructure sectors. Tom has been working in the Americas, the Asia Pacific, and in the European regions. As General Counsel at the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Clark is responsible for driving legal strategy and engagement on regulatory and policy reforms to support ADB's mission of achieving a sustainable, prosperous, inclusive, and resilient Asian Pacific region. Before joining ADB, Mr. Clark was Managing Director and Co-Head of Americas for the Global Public Policy Group of BlackRock. Now I will turn to our virtual panelists. Hello, just everyone is connected. Lovely to say hello from Dubai and to see you online. I will start with Ms. Leslie Sturtevant, who is the Deputy General Counsel of the IFC. Leslie is the Principal Advisor to the Vice President and General Counsel on legal matters within the Vice Presidency. She oversees the range of services the legal department provides to internal and external clients, advising on key legal and policy issues arising in connection with IFC's business. Hi, Leslie. Then I'll move on to Ms. Gülen Newton, who is the General Counsel at the Office of the Green Climate Fund. She's a senior legal executive with more than 20 years of experience in international development finance organizations. This includes more than a decade in holding executive roles at the Asian Development Bank and the Global Fund. Gülen provides high-level legal and strategic guidance to senior management at GCF. She has also advised senior government officials and boards of directors in the countries of operations and really helping countries reduce poverty, forge sustainable growth, and improve global public health. Hi, Gülen. Then I'll move to Ms. Katherine Meighan, who is the Associate Vice President and General Counsel at IFAD. And as part of the IFAD, which is the International Food Fund for Agricultural Development, thank you, Mike. She is a member of their senior management team. So Mrs. Meighan sets the fund's strategy to double its impact for the rural poor while scaling up climate adaptation, private sector lending, and IT for development. She leads complex initiatives, including amending the IFAD's articles to enable private sector lending, also lending to subnational entities, and creating a unique impact investment fund for small farmers. So that's an amazing list of panelists. So I will just start by asking the first question. So Mike, if I can first start with you, could you please tell us more about the key milestones that the EBRD has accomplished on its journey towards fulfilling climate finance goals? How has EBRD accomplished or kind of contributed to the SDGs and the Paris Alignment commitments?
Thank you so much, Vesselina, and thank you very much for including me on the panel. The really short answer to the question you just asked is you, because I'm sitting next to you and you've done an enormous amount of work yourself, which needs to be recognized. You lead a lot of the work we do at EBRD in this area. So if I could, if we were in a world of asking for rounds of applause for that work, I would ask for that for you now, but we'll save that for later. Okay. But people want details, so I will talk about details a little bit. For those of you who don't know EBRD, excuse me if you do, because then you can just look at your phones for a moment while I discuss it. But we're a private sector-oriented multilateral development bank, and we were established actually late as development banks go in 1991, mainly to drive progress towards market-oriented economies and democracies in the former Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. Now, since we were founded, we brought that model also to the Middle East and North Africa, and we are hoping later this decade to be able to do the same thing in sub-Saharan Africa. But it's important to note something very special about EBRD, which is that perhaps given the time of its founding in the 90s, it's one of the only institutions that was actually founded also with an environmental mandate built in. The development that is environmentally sound and sustainable has been a core focus of our work since we were founded. And it's kind of interesting because we tend to talk in EBRD about transition, i.e. the transition to different types of economies in this region that I mentioned. But in fact, we also work on a different type of transition, which is the green transition. Again, something we've done since we were founded. Many of the economies where we work, though, are probably the most carbon intensive in the world, and that has an impact in many ways. On the one hand, it represents a huge challenge, right? Because our regions are highly vulnerable themselves to climate change, but they're also reluctant in some ways to make the changes that would be required to actually welcome policies to help them make a transition. But it means also a huge opportunity for us because we're the ones who actually can help them both diversify their economies, but also to provide the type of technical assistance and support and financing to make that transition. Now, achieving the Paris Agreement climate mitigation and adaptation goals, it requires enormous ambition. You've heard many people already talk about billions to trillions for climate finance, and also talking about how difficult that will be. And one thing is very clear to us in EBRD with our private sector orientation, that is that while public finance absolutely has an essential role to play in this transition, it can't be the only one. It's impossible for it to work, for it to be the only one. And so, and the crisis is too serious and too urgent for it to be the only source of funds. Strong participation from the private sector is absolutely critical. So what do multilateral development banks like EBRD do generally in this area? And Tom will probably talk more about it after me, as the others. But we are, I think, uniquely placed to leverage capital and steer financial flows towards low carbon and climate resilient activities. And that's simply because of our global reach altogether as a group. The pool of capital that we have is made available to us through our shareholders and our donors. And the aim for us is to capitalize much bigger financial flows from the private sector. Now, in 2022, just again, as a quick primer on what we've been doing, our climate finance for low and middle income economies rose to $4.3 billion from $3.9 billion in 2019. And our climate finance overall rose by 35% actually in that period to $6.8 billion in 2022. Our own climate finance contributions just form a small part of the larger amount by the MDBs, which came to, excuse me, I meant to say that we actually, in this mobilization that I mentioned before, when you add up the portion that comes from the private sector as well, we mobilized a total of about 10 billion last year in climate finance. Still a drop in the trillions bucket, but still really, really important. Now, our green economy transition approach is guiding our way in this process. We have a goal to reach more than 50% green financing in all that we do. I'm really proud to say that though we thought we were ambitious in proposing that for 2025, we've actually been doing it for 3 years. So we're way ahead of the plan, but there's still so much more to do. 2023 is also a really important milestone here for EBRD, and that's because we committed, and we're among the first MDBs to do so, that from the first day of this year, all of our work would be aligned with Paris. And that's not, it's an easy thing to say, it's a very hard thing to do in practice, both because of all the changes it entails, but also because the methodology itself is not totally clear. So we've been leaders in trying to make that happen and understand what that means in practice. Over the next few years, our cooperation in the climate agenda with partner banks is also moving from what used to be sort of the use of proceeds model, where we would simply say, you use the money to do the following climate-related work, to what we would call a transition plan approach, where we were focusing much more on counterparties' entire risk portfolios in this area. What is their connection to climate? How does it work? We look much more closely into their policy work as well. Now, this change will be operationalized across the entire network of 300 partner banks, and we expect to bring this about in all of the economies where we work. But speaking of transition, I do want to focus a little bit, and I'll try to be as quick as I can, on what that transition means for people. While we have obviously transactional focus as an institution because we are a bank, I do want to highlight a few of the projects that we've done. We financed more than 18 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity since 2006. In Uzbekistan last year, EBRD arranged 2 syndicated loans worth combined $520 billion to help construct 2 wind power plants. And then that created a total installed capacity of 1 gigawatt. This is the largest renewable energy project that EBRD has done across all of its regions. We also supported the construction of Poland's biggest solar with 45 billion euro, excuse me, 45 million euro, quite large. And that alone is expected to save 138,000 tons of CO2 per year. We have a strong track record when it comes to sustainable finance instruments too. This year, we had the first sustainability-linked loan for Europe for 300 million euros to the Moroccan state-owned utility company. And we also lent 72.5 million to the first sustainability-linked bond in Croatia for its largest public utility. And finally, we're increasing our focus on projects that play a critical role in the circular economy. This year, EBRD committed a total financing package equivalent to around 120 million euros to support the construction of a greenfield recycling facility in southern Poland. But I mentioned transition, and I'll conclude on this point. The transition has to adjust. And we recognize that if you're going to bring some systemic change, it is change. Change is really important and difficult for people. And it means jobs change. It means, especially if you're working in very carbon-intensive economies, it means people need new jobs in this field. So we are deeply committed to a just transition, to the Just Transition Initiative in particular, which was launched in 2020. And the aim is to ensure that the benefits of the green economy transition are shared, while protecting, of course, vulnerable countries and people in regions. Just take one example. We had a recent investment in Serbia's national energy generation utility company, and the support included the development of a strategic workforce management plan reflecting the company's decarbonization plans, and the development of a retraining initiative that was required to do that. So let me conclude, because you have many others to hear from, but as you can see, it's been a busy few years for the bank in this area. We have a lot more to do, but it's an exciting path that we're going down. Let me hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for the very comprehensive answer. Now, I will turn to another regional bank that operates in Asia. Tom, if you can tell us more about what your institution is doing really to move towards and to contribute to the SDGs and really to align your financial goals with the mitigation adaptation goals of the Paris Agreement. And in particular, if you can give us some examples from technical assistance you provide to emerging economies and some of the fascinating legal projects that your team has structured. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vesselina. Again, I want to extend my thanks to the organizers of that. It's really been a terrific day, and be clear how proud we are to have, just so many students. And I will touch in my remarks, actually, although I'll talk about transactions and financing. I think one of the most important things we do, and I know you alluded to this, Mike, is making sure that we're building capacity, particularly in education, particularly in legal education, because so much is dependent upon, and I'm not just saying this because I know there are many students here in the room, but so much is dependent on what we do to really build awareness in the generation that is coming up and is going to have to deal with all these programs. So I'll talk a little bit about some of our educational programs, which I think is one of the most important things we can be doing, and makes it very nice to be here at a beautiful university setting for this. ADB, our president, Assoc, has said many times, and it continues to be true, that in some ways the battle against climate change will be won or lost in the Asia Pacific region. The reason for that is quite simple. Number one, that's where most of the emissions are. And number two, that's where most of the impacts are. We have small developing island countries in the Pacific, other vulnerable countries that literally disappear under the ocean within a generation because of climate change. So we're seeing incredible need, and we're seeing incredible emission that needs to be dealt with. So for that reason, we were one of the first MDBs to actually establish a clear climate investment target. Actually, it was at Glasgow a couple of years ago that we announced the escalation of our climate finance addition to $100 billion within the decade up to 2030. And we're on our course for that. It's challenging, but it's absolutely critical. We were one of the first MDBs to establish a climate risk screening and management framework for operations, one of the first to be accredited by the Green Climate Fund. And actually, in terms of putting all of these things into action, Paris alignment is absolutely the touchstone of what we're doing. We're probably a little behind EBRDs. We are 100% aligned with Paris now in our sovereign operations. With our non-sovereign operations, we're 85%, but with a commitment to be 100% Paris aligned in non-sovereign as well by July 2025. And completely second what Mike said about some of the challenges just with the metrics of that. But clearly that's the direction we're moving as quickly as possible. And furthermore, we've been working to multiply our own funds, and I think, again, you touched on this, Mike, but raising additional climate finance from the private sector is critical. Not only the private sector, but philanthropies, other capital markets, donors, and other resources, because our balance sheets with everything we're doing, and I'll touch on what we are doing, it's just not enough because of the existential and huge nature of the problem. But, leveraging our efforts together with others is really what a lot of this is all about. So in terms of some examples, what we've been doing recently, you may have heard of our innovative financing facility for climate in the Asia Pacific, which was just established earlier this year. We lovingly call it IFCAP. And IFCAP will facilitate the scaling up of climate finance by EBB's donors, and it uses an innovative guarantee scheme that leverages up to $4 of climate finance for every dollar of donor contribution, with the support of guarantees extended to ADB by its donors. This basically frees up capital from ADB's balance sheet for deployment into climate finance. And our aim is that because of this multiplier effect, that IFCAP will crowd in an additional $9 billion for climate investment. Now, the other thing, of course, we look at is as much as bringing more finance to the table, bringing more firepower to do green deals, and of course, generally that means wind and solar, and we're doing a lot of renewable power. And I'll talk about some of the specifics on that, but we can't beat this problem just by building new renewable power, because I think, as the data has shown, it's at an all-time high, but guess what? So is coal. So, we're building a lot more energy. Some of it is the right kind, some of it is not the right kind. And so in order to really tackle this problem, something has to be done to retire the fossil, the embedded fossil, particularly coal, which has, the highest emissions and the most NOx and SOx. And so very happy to say that in 2021, we launched the Energy Transition Mechanism, which will support the early retirement of coal-fired plants while boosting the share of clean energy in electricity systems. And currently, ADB is partnering with governments in Indonesia and the Philippines, working on very advanced feasibility studies in Kazakhstan, Pakistan, and Vietnam in order to deploy these resources through the energy transition mechanism. And in fact, since we're here at COP, it's very exciting because, down the street so much is going on. And just the other day, we announced a new framework agreement that was signed between ADB and the Indonesian state-owned power utility company, an independent power producer, Indonesian Investment Authority, and some other investors that have conditionally agreed to basically shorten the power purchase agreement for the 660 megawatt coal-fired power plant by Cirebon 1, and end the plant's obligation to provide electricity in December 2035 rather than what was planned in July of 2042. So that means you're taking 7 years of coal-fired emissions out of the atmosphere through that early retirement. And, when you look at this, that's retiring the plant would avoid so much greenhouse gas emissions, and the transaction, which will be finalized in the first half of next year, is really exactly sort of the epitome of what ETM is recognizing. We hope to, duplicate that Cirebon transaction in the other countries that I mentioned. We think that this is the proactive way to deal not only with making sure that green power gets financed, but also that the existing coal-fired plants and other fossil fuel can be retired early. Now, to do all of this, of course, we need to maximize our balance sheets. And another milestone achievement, and I think of the question you asked is like, where are we as lawyers working on this? One of the things is that our multilateral development banks, have been around for a while. But a consequence of that is that we do have some, provisions in some of our governing documents, our charters, our articles of agreements, which, frankly, are a little bit out of date. ADB actually has never had an amendment to its charter that's nearly 60 years of existence. But that's going to change because our board just approved our first ever amendment to our Articles of Incorporation, very much spearheaded by our legal team. And what does that amendment do? It's going to eliminate this pretty archaic one-for-one. Some banks call it a gearing ratio. Basically, it's an equity for that you can't have more loans outstanding than 100% of your equity. Very, very overly conservative, I think one could say, in terms of the modern science of risk management. So we're basically moving to a more state-of-the-art capital adequacy framework. This is very much in line with the G20 independent expert group recommendations on that. Very legally intensive work, obviously doing a charter amendment, but this is the kind of thing we need to unleash, the power of our balance sheet. Now, in addition to that, we're working, and again, I think this is the thing that, as a lawyer, you get all excited about, because it's like, we want to do transactions and facilitate, the private sector deals, the sovereign lending, but, really to make a change, and you alluded to this, Mike, so well, I mean, you need to go upstream, you need to actually make an enabling policy environment. And that's one of the things that we are focused on a lot. First of all, through our policy-based lending, which we found to be an effective way to foster comprehensive climate policy reforms, basically to encourage developing market countries, developing member countries to have the state-of-the-art policies that are needed to facilitate private sector investment, to create an enabling environment for specifically climate investment. For example, ADB has approved its first ever climate-focused PBL for the Philippines in 2022, and we're now processing similar operations in Mongolia and Pakistan. But in a way, even more upstream is looking at our work in law and policy reform. And that's one of the things that, as general counsel, I'm most proud of, because we've really put a lot of work into trying to go into the thought leadership area and help countries to enable, really the cutting edge legal reform work, which is going to mobilize more private sector capital, which is going to create the confidence to de-risk a number of these climate investments that need to be made. And, finally, I'll just mention that, we have to be very innovative in the way we look at some of these programs. And we've actually been working a lot to look at how we can invest in early stage funding. So, for example, we have an ADB Ventures group, which provides early stage funding and support for technologically driven projects that are scalable and can deliver climate impact. And we've set up the ASEAN Catalytic Finance Facility, which looks at de-risking green infrastructure projects, again, with the whole goal of crowding in private capital investors. But, let me close with what I said at the very beginning. And I'll say it's very exciting because it's very exciting because this morning I'm sitting in the developing education and capacity for climate law and policy session. I heard, a number of people, the professors talking about, I think, the Erasmus Plus project from Europe here. Just, we're doing something similar with our climate law champions, where we're trying to build the capacity and the really inclination and to educate, the next generation of leaders. Currently students, a lot of focus on law schools. We're doing a lot of work partnering with law schools in the region. Happy to say we've worked with the Philippine Supreme Court, and we're asked by them to basically create the first ever climate-specific mandatory law school curriculum that will now be mandatory in all Philippine law schools, so that the next generation of legal leaders understand the role of climate and the role lawyers can play to help promote, climate finance. So let me turn it back to you. Thanks for.
Thank you very much, Don, for a very informative and inspirational presentation, especially for us lawyers. And before I turn to our virtual participants, I just wanted to mention that Mike and I wrote an article about the role of lawyers, in particular in-house lawyers, and how they can drive change in their institutions, how they can help address climate change. And this article is included in this journal. It's also available online, so feel free to circulate and share with your friends, but also come back to us with any feedback that you may have. So I will turn now to Leslie. Leslie, IFC, the International Financial Corporation, has pledged to align 85% of new financial flows with Paris starting July 1st this year, and 100% alignment with the Paris Agreement as of July 1st, 2025. Would you be able to tell us a bit more what that actually means in practice for IFC as a global institution, and in particular for the lawyers working in your team? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vessi. Let me just check first whether you can hear me. Yep, good, very good. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me on this panel. It's very much appreciate to be here, and actually also learn from my panel members. And thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about what IFC has been doing. As you have mentioned, our business is currently, as of July 1st, 85% aligned with the Paris Agreement, and that we would be 100% aligned in 2025. If I want to step back a little bit just to share what IC does for the audience, we were created in 1956. We are one of the 5 institutions within the World Bank Group, and our mandate is to promote development through the private sector. So we are pretty much 100% focused on the private sector, and our interventions are, I think, similar to EBRD through investments, also mobilizing others, other private sector investors to co-invest alongside us. And we also have a lot of advisory services. And so we go both upstream, as Tom has mentioned, but also we help companies in capacity building and dealing with climate change events. We have a global mandate, so we work in all emerging market regions. And I want to mention also under our newish president, President Banga, we have updated our mission to include ending poverty on a livable planet. And I think the livable planet concept is a very powerful one. It includes climate change aspects of both mitigation and decarbonization, and also adaptation and resilience. I'm sure you've discussed in the sort of the past days the need for private sector. Just a data point, as I understand that there's about a need of 2.4 trillion investments each year in emerging markets to reach the Paris Agreement goals. I also wanted to share a little bit before I go into the application of the Paris alignment is the key milestones that we have reached. So we have had a 35% target for climate projects for the past 5 years. We have exceeded it. And in fact, in fiscal year 23, we achieved 7.6 billion in climate finance for our own account, which is about 46% of our commitments. And we've mobilized an additional 6.8 billion. I think that's a total of 14.4 billion lent and mobilized towards climate projects. We similarly at EBRD, we will have a goal of 50% going forward. As you mentioned, we have been Paris aligned since July 1st. And for us, Paris alignment means a commitment by IFC to align our business with the Paris Agreement goals. And to do that, we work with our clients to build their capacity, and we also choose projects we invest in very carefully. So every single project that we invest in has to meet certain standards for climate mitigation and climate adaptation risks. Maybe to share in how we implement that structurally. We mainstreamed climate into our operations, and we actually have a climate team that's our internal client. There are about 73 staff across the regions and in Washington, D.C. and HQ. And we also have climate champions in each industry. The legal department itself has created a climate practice group that all of our lawyers attend. We have a full-time lawyer dedicated to climate matters to support the climate team, supported by a manager, and also our industry champions are heavily involved in the application of the Paris alignment principles. Training also has been key. With the climate team, over 800 staff were trained over the past year. And the training was really to mainstream climate principles, as I have mentioned, because every single project needs to go through this lens. And so there's been an effort to educate and to include climate in the principles that every single investment officer uses, and we support that very closely. Maybe also share sort of our investment strategies and what we focus on in climate. We have a huge focus on de-risking, which is key to bring in the private sector, as you all know. And to do that, for example, we use a lot of blended finance, which is basically using donor funds from governments or other donors to blend it with the market rate. And in doing that, you enhance the return for the private sector because the donor money takes either a first loss or takes a lower return to facilitate private sector coming in. We're also investing in new types of opportunities. We focus on green hydrogen, for example. Lithium mining is another example. Hard to abate sectors such as zero carbon steel. climate smart agribusiness, and climate smart urban transportation, so e-buses, for example. We focus on green buildings as well, and I'll give you an example in a minute. And obviously also green and blue bonds and sustainably linked bonds and loans, as Mike has mentioned, for EBRD. Finally, just wanted to mention standard setting goals and function. So we were instrumental in putting together the blue bond principles for use of proceeds in oceans, and also biodiversity guidelines for investment. Maybe I'll mention two examples of interventions that we've had that have been particularly impactful in the climate space. Some of these have been around for a long time, but I think have really developed in the past year or so. One is a product called EDGE. It actually stands for Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiency. It's the goal of the product is to decarbonize real estate markets, and it serves as a climate mitigation solution to unlock green finance. And it was developed in-house. It comprises a web-based software, a standard that is a universal standard that is set in a certification program. And just to share a little bit the reach of the program, it was created in 2013 and has certified about 57 billion in value of certified floor space in 90 countries, and supported about 10.2 billion in investments. It includes a advisory services or technical assistance to regulators aspect. For example, we assisted Colombia with the Green Building Code in 2015, and the introduction of tax incentives for technical solutions for energy efficiency. With Colombia, they launched the EDGE Green Building Program with the local chamber of construction. So in 2022 alone, 27% of all the new buildings were green certified. So that's one example. Another example is something we call MCPP, One Planet. As you know, we love acronyms in our institutions. MCPP stands for Managed Co-Lending Portfolio Program, and it's a program that was set up by our syndications department that allows us to bring in investors to co-invest alongside IFC in a portfolio of loans. And the MCPP One Planet platform is actually designed to allow investments in Paris-aligned investments. So 100% Paris-aligned investments are offered to commercial investors, and the size is up to $3 billion in commitments. I think you asked also, Vessi, of sort of the legal department and our role. And let me go a little bit into that to share what we've done. As I've mentioned, we now have dedicated lawyers. Obviously, we're project lawyers, so we continue to support the documentation of climate-related requirements. And it's a range of tools that we use. It could be covenants, it could be reporting, it could be helping the climate team come up with a climate mitigation plan, decarbonization plan, climate risk mitigation plan. So it really varies case by case, and it's also very much adapted to the various industries. So we have an adapted approach depending on whether it's a power, agribusiness, financial institutions. Apologies for my voice. We also advise on risk allocation. So as I mentioned, the blended finance interventions have been critical to bring in the private sector. So we advise on sort of risk mitigation tools. We also help the climate department on interpreting sort of very technical methodologies and helping them write that in ways that the clients understand in the documentation. Obviously, we support a big range of financial instruments, as I mentioned, and so we stay on top of sort of market trends and the various instruments for lending. And maybe I'll mention, we also play a role in advising on sort of addressing climate risks in terms of litigation risks. There's a lot of climate litigation, as you know, increasing, and avoiding greenwashing risks. So when we engage in things like carbon trade, carbon finance, we make very clear and ensure that methodologies are sound and carefully thought through. So I think those are a few of the things that the legal department has been critical in helping the business with. With that, I think I'll turn it back to you, Bessie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for providing such a rich overview of all the activities that you're doing at IFC and also in your department. The breadth of issues and topics that you touched upon, I just wish that one day we had the time to go into separate workshops for all the topics mentioned, and greenwashing becoming increasingly important, and also all the innovative legal drafting and how you support the work on the project side is very inspirational. Also, I just wanted actually to thank you for joining us. I know that it's early hours in DC, so special thanks for me and for the organizers for joining this panel, Leslie.
My pleasure.
With this, I would like to turn to Gülen from the Global Climate Fund. So GCF is an operating entity of the financial mechanisms of UNFCCC and actually serves the Paris Agreement, and its main goal is to support the Paris mitigation and adaptation goals. So Gülen, please let us know, what does it mean in practice, and what are the projects that GCF supports, especially in emerging markets, and what are the key challenges that you see and opportunities? Thank you.
Thank you, Bessie. I appreciate the opportunity. And the message I had gotten was we were each given 4 minutes to respond to this question, so my answers are going to be brief. For those of you who may not be that familiar with the Green Climate Fund, I know that everybody on this panel is, but for the other's sake, just a bit of historical background on Green Climate Fund. It was set up just in 2010 as an operating entity of the financial mechanism of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, as you have mentioned. And by mandate, it serves the Paris Agreement. It's the world's largest climate fund with a portfolio of $52 billion at this point in time, which includes co-financing. 13.5 billion of that being the direct funding coming from GCF, covering 128 developing countries for 240 climate projects. It has received pledges and commitments, contributions for approximately, can you hear me? For approximately 30 billion. Sorry, there's some static or some mixture there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you with no problem whatsoever. So please.
Okay. Okay, so it has received pledges and contributions for approximately $30 billion to date. And some of those pledges were announced right at COP28. You might have witnessed some of that. But you are all aware that, as well as we do, that addressing climate change requires mobilizing funds at scale. I also want to talk a bit about how we work, how GCF works. It's a country-driven mechanism by which, through its programs, it supports country planning, and its programming is aligned with country priorities. It is an open partnership organization. It works with accredited entities, I realize all of the panelists here represent accredited entities of the GCF, as well as other MDBs, international financial institutions, and community level organizations. It has a range of financing instruments, leveraging blended finance and piloting support for. I do get somebody else talking. Somebody's talking over.
It's very clear. We hear you very clearly from our side, Gülen. So
Okay, must be on my side. Apologies. So I was referring to the range of financing instruments, leveraging blended finance, as well as piloting support for innovative financial structures. It has a balance. It targets a balanced allocation by virtue of its governing instrument, 50% for adaptation and 50% for mitigation projects. It accepts higher risks. It accepts higher risks to support early stage project development and innovations and innovations to catalyze climate finance. In terms of in terms of you asked us to share examples of the kind of support we each provide. So I'd like to give examples of a couple of projects funded by the Green Climate Fund. One of them is called the Infrastructure Climate Resilient Fund. The objective of the fund is to promote development of climate resilient infrastructures and prevent significant climate-induced losses that could be associated with infrastructure damages in Africa. It has a total financing of $765 million with GCF direct financing of $240 million first loss equity and the $14 million worth of a grant. It combines blended capital strategies while incentivizing climate risk preparedness and transfer. This fund has a $2 billion worth of infrastructure assets that will be more resilient through the interventions of this fund. GCF's concessional capital is intended to absorb the increase in project costs for incorporating climate resilience into the design of the assets. Sorry. I'm having difficulty. Another such example is a green guarantee company. The objective of this company is it is the first global institution dedicated to leveraging its funding by providing guarantees for climate bonds with significant climate adaptation and mitigation impacts. It has a total financing of $405 million, with GCF financing comprising $82.5 million in equity investment. This company de-risks investments in climate bonds and crowds in private finance. It has a guarantee capacity of $4 billion. GCF is the founding equity shareholder, incentivizing participation from private and institutional commercial investors. These are the examples that I could give within the time frame. I'd be happy to provide more examples when it comes to the second question regarding the impact. So I'll stop here and turn it back to you, Bessie. Thank you.
Move to Katherine from the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I don't know if we lost Katherine.
I'm here, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. A similar question to you, really, on how your institution meets the climate ambition, and more, relevant, I think, also, and what distinguishes you from some of the other panelists is if you can focus a bit more on adaptation finance, because it's just really more difficult to invest in adaptation projects, and adaptation and agriculture being key for tackling the climate crisis. So we would appreciate some highlights from you and some practical examples of the work that you do. Katherine, over to you.
Thanks so much. Today we stand at a really critical juncture in history. We all know, and we're hearing over and over, that global temperatures are set to hit the critical 1.5 degree threshold within the next 6 years. And we know that a warmer planet is a hungrier planet. And we keep seeing higher temperatures, extreme weather, and they're going to have the biggest impact on agricultural and food systems. And they really threaten food security and nutrition worldwide. This will, of course, affect all of us. We all see prices going up in the local food stores, et cetera. But the threat to the rural populations that IFAD serves is literally existential. So these are the people Tom refers to who are living on small island nations that in decades will be underwater. These are people seeing their coastlines washed away by sea level rise and erosion. These are people who are struggling with the dual threat of water, both as droughts as well as excessive floods, often mixed up in the same season of crops and harvests. So 80% of the world's poor and most hungry live in the developing rural areas, and they depend on small agriculture, both to feed themselves and their communities, as well as to make a living. In Africa, 1 in 5 people does not get enough to eat. 1 in 5. And sadly, the situation there is worse today than it is in COVID. And this is exactly the population that IFAD finances. So we're both a UN specialized agency as well as an international financial institution, IFI. And we invest in rural, poor, small-scale food producers and farmers. And what we feel is that we really can't wait any longer to transform agri-food systems. We have to invest in these food systems now, and we have to invest at scale. And that's exactly IFAD's mission, to finance these small-scale farmers and food producers all across the developing world. We work in over 100 countries in every region of the world. So today, I'd like to just share with you 2 facts and 1 example of a project. So fact 1, investing in agriculture is 2 to 3 times more effective in reducing poverty than investing in any other sector. Fact 2, every dollar invested in boosting agricultural resilience today can save $10 of future emergency aid tomorrow. So knowing these 2 facts, you might ask, well, why is it that for every $12 invested in climate mitigation, as you said, only $1 is invested in climate adaptation? I mean, didn't the Paris Agreement, imply that we should be having equal amounts of investment in climate adaptation and climate mitigation? But we've seen climate mitigation finance rise dramatically, while climate adaptation finance is really a fraction of it. And climate adaptation finance is really helping the people who are today hurt the worst by the climate crisis. So these are things like, planting trees, using climate-resistant soils, building irrigation trenches to catch floodwaters, that it can be used during droughts, things like that, so that one severe climate event doesn't wipe out the livelihood of an entire family, or worse, wipe out an entire community. When you look at climate finance, small farmers produce more than 1/3 of the world's food, but they're receiving only 1.7% of climate finance, so less than 2% of climate finance out there. You asked why this is and why it's so hard. I frankly see it as a type of market failure. The markets see rural agriculture as an extremely risky business. It's risky to invest in agriculture just to start with. Agriculture is something, if something goes wrong, you can't just lock up your plant and then come back, in a few months and restart operations, right? The crops have died. Financing small farmers and small producers is seen as even riskier, and doing this in some of the most rural and frankly vulnerable areas of the world where we work is seen as even more risky. So mobilizing climate finance specifically around agriculture adaptation, which can help the people hurt the most now, is very tricky. It's tough work, and I think that's one of the reasons that the amounts are still $12 to $1. But IFAD is working exactly to try to turn that around and scale it up. And that's one example that I want to share with you today. And this example is something actually we're working on with many partners, including GCF, including the Nordic Development Fund, as well as the governments of Finland, Denmark, the EU, and a private sector partner, the Equity Bank in East Africa, and it's called ARCAFIM. It's the Africa Rural Climate Finance Mechanism. And basically what it is it's a platform with showing that it's viable to have a very large scale public-private climate adaptation finance platform to de-risk and crowd in significant amounts of private money. This platform is basically blending de-risking with risk sharing and targeted technical assistance across 4 countries in Africa: Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. And the idea is that by de-risking these areas, we have a private sector partner, Equity Bank, putting in half of the financing to match the financing by the other partners. And this project is projected to directly benefit 1 million people across these countries, which is really a remarkable impact. It's prioritizing women and youth producers who are too often left behind. And another, I think, really interesting innovation of the ARCAFIM platform is that we've developed a very precise climate adaptation taxonomy, outlining the specific benefits and criteria for counting something as adaptation on lending. We all hear talk about greenwashing and this when we're issuing bonds, et cetera. And there's climate adaptation is hard. It's hard to finance. It's much easier to put millions into kind of a solar power plant or something like that than doing these very kind of smaller scale, but very impactful climate adaptation finance. And so having this taxonomy really helps. So that's the example I wanted to share with you. It's not just a one-off project, but we really see it as a scalable model to tackle climate adaptation going forward.
Thank you so much, Katherine, for a very, very powerful presentation, and all the numbers still echo in my head. So I will go for a very quick second round of questions to our panelists, and I will ask the panelists if they can keep their answers short so we can manage the time as well. Katherine, I will start in the reverse order, so I'll ask you the first question. So you're talking about the impact and the impact of the platform that you're having in these projects on the ground. That's inspirational. So what do you think would be the priority for IFAD in the future going forward for maximum impact? So what are let's say the best practices or the ones that you will be focusing on to scale up and deliver more, capitalize and mobilize more private sector financing to go into adaptation? And a very quick answer to the question of the role of your department, the legal department, really of enabling all these wonderful things to happen on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd focus on 2 things, I think. One is that we're really trying to connect the international capital markets to the very rural poor in climate adaptation. And second, we're really trying to scale up and ring the alarm bell on the need for massive finance investments in climate adaptation, of course, alongside climate mitigation. So on the first one, I'm really happy to note that just 2 weeks ago, IFAD made a historic opening at the London Stock Exchange, where we've listed 4 of our private placements we did over the last year and a half. And we issued our first ever impact report. And what's really cool about the impact report is it talks about how we use our proceeds. And it's not just for SDG 2, no hunger, which is of course extremely important, but it specifically tracks the proceeds of all of our work to 16 out of the 17 SDGs. And I think that that shows really very amazing impact across all of the SDGs: climate, gender, water, peace building, things so important to really achieving these goals. So the first is connecting international capital markets to the very rural poor, to have that focus. The second thing I would note is, taking a step back and looking at how we as an institution do our projects in a very climate positive way. And so one thing I wanted to share with you that you might find surprising, because most of us know that agriculture and food systems contribute to about 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, is that we did a study of IFAD projects over the last 20 years. And IFAD projects are a net carbon sink. What does that mean? That means, surprisingly, that when you look at our projects over the last 20 years, they were not a net CO2 emitter, but to the contrary, they're draining and absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere with a negative carbon balance. And that's a pretty impressive thing when you're working in agriculture, which is a net emitter. You might ask, how can that be? It's really looking at agricultural practices. For example, in Senegal, where there's been a massive deforestation of mangroves, we've replanted mangrove trees. We've introduced new crops in the roots of those trees, like oysters, and helped local farmers and communities get high value products out of those. So those are things that we're doing. The legal department is extremely involved in this. For example, we have been working on, as I mentioned in the ARCFM project, having the very specific criteria for what constitutes climate adaptation finance. So we don't have kind of the greenwash effect, let's say, when finance is on lent. We work hand in hand with the climate team. We really see ourselves as partners in the business to develop strategies, look at policy, work with governments on approaches, for example, about safe and better rainwater management, irrigation management, things like this that affect both across one country, but also in regional projects where we see drought and climate issues affecting many regions, not just stopping, unfortunately, at countries' borders. So these are some of the ways that we're working together as lawyers with the business, really as partners together. These are tough issues, and they require, I think, all hands on deck to find sustainable solutions.
Thank you very much, Katherine. Gülen, you ended your presentation by alluding to the fact that you have some interesting practical examples on the impact of GCF work in emerging markets. Would you mind sharing a couple of those for us? Thank you.
Sure. In addition to what I have already shared with you, I'd like to talk about yet another one, which is called the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund. It's an adaptation project. Its purpose is to improve climate resilience to ensure long-term sustainable increases in agriculture productivity and incomes for smallholder farmers. So it follows well from Katherine's presentation. In addition to supporting innovative private social entrepreneurs and micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises by providing aggregate and digital innovative financial services to smallholder farmers. It covers 4 countries in Africa and includes a variety of projects. But the drivers for increased resilience under this funding is the increase of number of resilient farmers was driven by access to enablers, which include improved practices of irrigation, crop rotation, use of top cover, intercropping, better farm inputs, better access to markets, and a resilient mix of livestock and crops. 80% of the farmers impacted by this project reported an increase in yields. 80% reported increase in income. 95% reported increase in the quality of life, and they reflect an increase of altogether 45% of climate resilient farmers. Also, there are co-benefits, of course, improving livelihoods in terms of improved access to water resources as well as energy resources. Female farmers represented 38% of the impacted farmers, and this percentage is expected to increase over the lifetime of the investment period, which is until 2030. So this is an example, I think a good representative example of the kind of impact that we have witnessed on the ground, despite the short presence, a short life of GCF to date. And I'd like to touch also on what the future focus of GCF is expected to be, since we're more forward-looking, if I may, please. And this is best expressed through a new strategy plan that was recently adopted, covering the period of 2024 to 2027. By which the GCF will continue to promote the paradigm shift and implementation of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. The GCF will direct its 2024 to 27 programming towards more readiness and project preparatory support with enhanced focus on climate programming and direct access. Mitigation and adaptation, supporting paradigm shifts across sectors, addressing urgent and immediate adaptation and resilience needs, and promoting innovation and catalyzing green financing through promotion of private sector. Of course, access and scaling investments and impact is at the heart of the strategic plan. So our vision is to create or to have the capacity to manage capitalization of 50 billion by 2030. So that has been our slogan, has been pronounced by our new executive director in various international fora, 50 by 30. So I'll stop here in the interest of time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You provided us with a lot of food for thought. Leslie, over to you, and really maybe just 1 minute, because here I take the privilege of being a moderator to ask you if you could please, you already gave us quite a comprehensive overview of the many activities that ASI is carrying out. But if you could just highlight one particular project that you have felt that has really reached the maximum impact. It will something inspirational really for the audience to take home. Thank you.
Thank you, Vessi. And yes, I'll try to be briefer this time. I wanted to share maybe some data points on the impact that we've had. And so just I'll share 2 or 3 very quickly. So that you can understand sort of the interventions that we have at the project level, the data that comes out of that in terms of impact on the climate. For example, in transport, our electrical vehicle investments help avoid 2 million tons of emissions annually. And obviously establish a viability of these e-mobility models that are emerging. So it's quite powerful in terms of emissions results. Another data point is that in the last fiscal year, IFC helped developing countries avoid about 11.5 million tons of carbon emissions. And I think that would be the equivalent of about 3 large coal-powered plants off the grid. I did want to mention one project that we have that I think is particularly powerful and dovetails with what Katie was saying in terms of the impact in agribusiness. Is we have a $6 billion global food security platform, and the innovation there that is quite powerful is that it integrates IFC's responses across different industry groups. So we work with financial institutions, with agribusiness, with tech, because a lot of the investments use agri-tech innovation and technology, and then we leverage a lot of financial institutions, enabling them to reach out to small farmers. In terms of where IFC will focus substantively, we have a climate change action plan at the World Bank Group level, and really we have focusing on 5 key systems. Energy, clearly clean energy cities is very important, transport, manufacturing, and agriculture as well. And I would add to that health as well, as we know climate change has significant negative impacts on health. Just a final thought maybe, and this dovetails with what Katie was sharing in terms of, climate adaptation as well as mitigation, is that, as I mentioned before, IFC approach to Paris alignment looks at both aspects in every single project. And so you could have a project that enhances climate mitigation because it reduces carbon emissions, and yet it has vulnerability to extreme weather events and climate change. And so the approach is really to look at both aspects in every single project, and I think that's quite powerful. And then maybe one last thing I'll mention is in the area of public policy, we have engagements to do capacity building with banks, and I'll mention one project which is called the IFC Green Banking Academy. It's a knowledge and capacity building initiative that supports Latin America and Caribbean banks to accelerate their green transformation. And in that context, we've trained over 5,000 bankers. With that, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you so much.
So much. Thank you, Leslie. Tom, over to you for a powerful example projects from the Asian Pacific region.
Well, I'll try to be powerful, but I'll definitely be brief. I'm going to say 2 things. I'll take 40 seconds in total, if I go over. Okay. You asked about a project, Monsoon Wind Power. I love it. Why? Because this is a 600 megawatt wind power in Laos. Okay, and actually, it's selling across Vietnam. It's got regional economic integration, and it used several blended finance tools to basically address bankability gaps. That's exactly what MDBs should be doing. And I kind of love that project because it checks so many boxes. Hope to do more of it. It's in our sweet spot. Let me just say one thing going forward. I think we should all look at what the future is. I just want to say voluntary carbon markets, our 6 of Paris, we're working a lot from a policy end with Central and Edouard, because if we don't get that right, we're not going to have the global carbon credit market that we need to do debt for nature and everything else. So policy, transaction, MDBs have to look at all. Thanks, Rick.
I know what you're going to ask me, so I won't even pass it back to save time. One example from us. Going back to 2017 in Egypt, we put in place a 1.5 gigawatt the Ben Ban complex for the first solar park in Egypt. We thought that's the beginning of a good relationship. Boy, were we right. Over time, we financed many more megawatts of power in Egypt for the transmission company. And that led to last year at the COP a commitment for EBRD to be the lead partner on the WEFE, which is the Nexus Water Food Energy Initiative. What that will do is take 5 gigawatts of inefficient fossil fuel power capacity and transform it by 2025 to 10 gigawatts of solar and wind energy in 2028. So, and this will also unlock $10 billion in private investment. So it's just an incredible facility that addresses the 2 most common issues for transition countries for fossil fuels: strengthen the energy grid and support the just transition for effective people.
Thank you so much, Tom and Mike. That's fantastic closing of this panel. I just would like to invite all of us to give us a big thank you to our fantastic panelists. We've learned so much, and I think that it's been inspirational and also give us some ideas for us also as lawyers to continue supporting this agenda. Thank you.